Hello everyone and welcome to our Group 7 presentation. I'm Madison Rodriguez.
I'm Nicole Richardson.
I'm Angela Sagun.
And today we're going to be talking to you guys about DIY SynBio or synthetic biology scientists. And these are also known as biohackers. Okay, so you may be wondering, who are biohackers? So biohackers are amateur scientists, students, or hobbyists who are using the similar synthetic biology techniques that professional scientists are using in their own laboratories. However, they do not always have the same access to resources, so they either are purchasing their own equipment online or they're being involved in community-based lab groups in which these scientists can practice in a general space with sort of communal equipment. And as you can see, I have a little picture here showing that, some people are even practicing this synthetic biology in their own, what looks like this guy's in his own garage, which is super cool that you can do that. So these types of labs, the community-based labs, are really great because they don't discriminate against anyone regarding academics or cultural or social economic background. And it's really great because it allows people to have the access to the materials that they want for the ideas that they have. So it is also possible for anyone to purchase genetic material and engineering material and technology online. Some prices range from $1,000, or there's even kits that are only $500 that allow people to practice synthetic biology. So along with this equipment, there is also a vast bank of bioinformatic tools made available, and we learned a lot about this in lecture, that it's possible to download an entire genome of something at the very push of a button. And using this equipment and this information that they're provided from so many sources are where the term biohackers comes from. So biohacking is the idea of making use of genetic material for a variety of purposes. Biohackers use it for reworking DNA and many other molecular processes, ranging from experimenting with yeast to creating entire new viruses. And this term is similar to the hacking we know in terms of computers. However, there's an important focus on finding out new and clever ways to do things through the processes of synthetic biology that we had learned about. So, since I had mentioned that a lot of these DIY biologists are amateur scientists or those with with not as much experience, you may be wondering how regulations work in that sense. So I'm going to delve into a bit of administration in the world of DIY biology. So the regulations regarding practicing synthetic biology vary whether if it's by state or by country. It is usually common for one to need a license in order to practice this type of science. However, there is no current amateur-specific licenses that have been adapted for these DIY biologists. So in the US, there's little regulation for synthetic biology. In countries outside of the US, say if there's a community lab, a community DIY bio lab, then they're able to directly apply for a license as a laboratory. But in the US, we don't have that. There's little regulation for synthetic biology. So there is an ethics code, however, that was created in 2011 by the North American Congress, and that was meant to adopt safe practices while still practicing synthetic biology. And it is important to know that this ethics code was non-legally binding. It was more a general consensus and understanding within the community of synthetic biology. So the regulatory systems that we see focus a lot more on the products being made rather than the science behind them, which is why we see a lot of focus on patents. So patents are what prohibits some of these DIY biologists from having direct access to certain materials or products because there's a legal block and they don't really have as much leeway and awareness of how to get past that. So why are these people or these synthetic biology, DIY biologists interested in synthetic biology? And this is for a myriad of reasons. For many, science is a hobby, and they have a love for the pursuit of further knowledge and understanding about the world around them. So because of this pursuit, there is a great possibility that something groundbreaking could be discovered, which is the possibility of someone having an idea and actually being able to pursue it and take the steps towards it because they have this technology and this great thing that synthetic biology can do right at their fingertips. This will expand the possibilities of synthetic biology to help better the world around us because it won't limit it to just those who have the ability to gain a proper education or who have the proper resources just at their disposal. DIY scientists are also interested in synthetic biology because they can find a sense of community, especially with others who are in the same situation where maybe they're not as educated or they don't have the same resources. They're able to find a sense of community and sort of work together with others in that sort of way. And another main interest in this type of science is that it has a possibility of economic gain. And this is in the sense of entrepreneurship, where normal people will be able to profit upon their ideas and the things that they are creating. And I'm going to discuss this further in some examples, which we're going to talk about now. So SynBio is a company that we had talked about in lecture, but I wanted to talk about it again here because it's super important, especially in the world of DIY scientists. So what they do is provide funding to blossoming or small companies that are starting out that are interested in synthetic biology. So they provide over $250,000 in funding, lab spaces, and a very large and fast network of connections and ways to grow their businesses and with professionals. And these scientists engage with founders and investors in order to turn their products into a real financial gain, which is a great goal for them to have. And this has allowed for a great return of great ideas into almost a $3.4 million company, which this money produced by these DIY scientists can have a great boost for the economy, as well as putting money back in for these amateur scientists who are growing and needing the resources and the education in order to pursue the ideas that they have in their head. So there are about 159 companies that have come from this. So we're going to talk about a few here. So Pembient is a company that came from Seattle, Washington, and they went through SynBio in order to pursue their product and their design and their idea. And their idea was creating a they created a synthetic or artificial horn out of certain protein fiber, and it was meant to mimic that of a rhino or elephant ivory, which is important because it allows for the conservation of these animals from poachers to be bettered, which is super important as these animals start to become endangered or very much they start to become endangered. And their Pembient is working to curb the illegal trade of these horns as well as protect these animals from dangerous poachers, which is a very clear example of how these DIY scientists use synthetic biology to better the world around them, and how companies like SynBio are great for supporting and encouraging the growth of these types of companies from DIY scientists.
Okay, so another example of a company that is based on synthetic biology is SynBio. SynBio is a company funded by SynBio and is based in California. And what they do is they make red blood cells the same way our body does, but just in a lab. Although making blood outside of the body has been possible for a few decades, SynBio is able to use their technology to produce artificial blood on a commercial scale. Currently, we only have donors to rely on, which causes many complications due to things such as different blood types, pathogens donors carry, and the fact that there's not enough blood donated to meet worldwide demands. With SynBio's commercialized production of blood, not only will there be more blood available, but it is pathogen-free, toxin-free, lasts longer in the body, and matches all blood types. Next slide, please. DIY biologists are very intrinsically driven since they practice biosynthesis for a hobby because they enjoy it. They get fulfillment by being able to create a community around what they love to do. they also get fulfillment by making a difference in their communities. No matter what that difference is, reducing their carbon footprint by making their own glowing plant to help them read in the dark, saving animals' lives by making synthetic horn and ivory to reduce poaching, or making a living off being an entrepreneur of a biohacking company. Next slide, please. In terms of extrinsic value, DIY biologists also practice biohacking to help other people. Biohackers help the public in many ways, including making medical necessities more accessible to the public, like SynBio has with their synthetic blood, combating climate change with the development of environment-saving technologies such as bacteria with the ability to degrade plastic, like discussed in lecture, or engineering ways to ensure the food security of a growing population being met with the challenge of the reduction of natural resources, like finless foods who make synthetic fish. Next slide. So you may be asking yourself, why should I, a government official on a presidential commission for synthetic biology, care about these people and their hobbies? Well, since synthetic biology could be the answer to some of the most pressing issues we face as a society today, like the cure for cancer, climate change, etc., it would be most beneficial to have as many perspectives as possible when tackling these problems. This will only be provided by people with many different backgrounds and perspectives, which is where DIY biologists come in. Since there is no set criteria that needs to be met to become a DIY biologist, they make this synthetic biology field very diverse. And as Darwin once said, diversity is crucial to solving problems. Plus, the more people working to solve these problems, the faster and more efficiently they get solved. Next slide. Another reason you should support biohackers is because the economic value Madison mentioned. DIY biologists are funded by the public and good for the economy because anyone has the opportunity to invest in the biosynthetic companies. Because biohackers do not have to rely or compete for government funding, this means that the public can prioritize what companies get money and therefore the ideas that come to fruition. This takes the politics out of funding and puts the people's needs first. This can provide a stop to the exploitation of people who depend on things like insulin and can prioritize what the people need most, like food security and medical advances.
Now that we've explained why biohackers should be supported, we want to share what are some possible outcomes that biohackers hope to gain. One of the main outcomes is not to have restrictions that prohibit them from practicing at-home science, because that would be taking away from what they enjoy. We believe that we deserve to be able to have an education because it will lead them to be safer when conducting their experiments and lessen the worry of people conducting such experiments. We also believe that they should have access to technology and have public labs in order for them to conduct their experiments. The reason being is because while they have access to better technology and public labs, they will have what is necessary for them to conduct their experiments and also be safe at the same time. Finally, biohackers should not be proclaimed as bad people. The media constantly refers to biohackers as unreliable and dangerous people because they are simply not professionals. However, people fail to realize that actual organizations tend to use the help of biohackers. Next slide, please. This slide is an example of SynBiologists who have faced consequences because of his actions of experimenting on himself. Aaron Treywick lived life as a spectacle with all cameras rolling. So for those who knew him, it wasn't surprising that his death was shrouded in spectacle and controversial. At just 28, Treywick was among the most infamous figures in the world of biohacking. The grandiose CEO of a tiny company called Ascendance Biomedical, whose goal was to develop and test a new gene therapies without the expense and rigor of clinical trials or the oversight of the FDA. Trewick wanted to cure cancer, herpes, HIV, and even aging, and he wanted to do it without having to deal with the rules and safety precautions of regulatories and industry standards. In February 2018, Trewick injected into his bare left thigh an experimental herpes treatment developed by his company. Only a couple months after injecting himself with this treatment, he was found dead, and many people believe that the reason he died was because he experimented on himself. Next slide, please. Some alternatives and compromises that we would be willing to agree to and also be safe at the same time are having community labs. We believe that community labs would be much easier for biohackers to group together and at the same time be supervised by professionals. Being supervised will allow them to experiment all they want while with the community of lab biohackers within the community. They can have technology and be supervised while being safe. This compromise will resolve the issue in which people argue that biohackers are not supervised and therefore cannot be trusted. We hope that this compromise will fix that in order to keep synthetic biology going. Another major issue that people have is synbiologists tend to experiment on themselves, as we just saw in the previous slide. The founder of Ascendance Biomedical, Aaron Trewick, experimented on himself and injected himself with what he hoped was the herpes treatment. Next slide, please. This eventually led to his death, which caused many people to be skeptical about SynBio. However, we have found a solution. We believe that if companies were to invest in synbiologists, they will have the necessary resources to conduct their experiments while also testing them before actually using them. Not only will this allow synbiologists to be safer and have more access to money, which will lead to technology, but it may even help people find cures for diseases that have not been found yet. Finally, in order to keep SynBio happening, we believe that supervising them and allowing them to sign a code of ethics would be best and allow people to trust them more. We believe that this will gain many people's trust because of how safe they are, and while being supervised will allow them to do more experience and have a lesser risk of doing something rash that will hurt the environment and even hurt themselves, like Aaron Trewick. Although we have multiple alternatives, we do have recommendations that we would like to see put into action. Our main recommendations that we feel are necessary are creating a code of conduct. We believe that this will help and be effective, because by signing the code of conduct, they will be held responsible for what they do and be punished if it is wrong. We also recommend that people begin to recognize synbiologists and invest in their research. We believe that it will be safer and also allows for scientists to do what they love and someday find research that will change the world. Here, next slide, please. Sorry. Here are more recommendations that we have and believe should be put into action in order for synbiologists to continue their research. We believe that there should be a law that allows for them to continue their research, but also have safe protocols. We believe that the code of conduct will allow them to be more trustworthy, allow them to be held accountable for their experiments if it is caused harm to the public, and we encourage professionals to invest or help these at-home scientists, because synbiologists are people who want to become scientists but either do not have access to education or rather do not have the necessary tools to become scientists, which forces them to use parts of other machineries to do their experiments.
Okay, and we wanted to provide you guys a little conclusion. So overall, what we hope is understood is that biohackers practice synthetic biology for many reasons. There is a passion for science and a drive to benefit the world around them that is really pushing this idea that these amateur scientists want to get into this world of synthetic biology. And DIY synthetic biology has a great potential. However, if we limit restrictions that are being made upon the DIY scientists, as Angela had mentioned, and instead create a binding code of ethics in a way to help create transparency within the community where they're still allowed to practice, but at the same time are focused on maintaining an ethical point of view and everything involving that, then that will help create a safer community and will help the public feel better about amateur scientists. So we want to thank you for coming to our presentation and we hope you enjoyed. And here's our sources.